Digimon Survive was released the same year that Russia hawked a loogie on Ukraine. And even though I was absolutely all over this game when it came out, due to how many great first impressions it gave me, after about 50 hours across 2 playthroughs, it ended up making me realize this game had so much wasted potential. But before I explain how much Digimon Survive was a disappointment for me, I want to go over some of the things that I think it did right. The setup of the plot, the main cast of characters, and the overall tone of the game is fucking great. You can tell that whoever was in charge of coming up with the ideas had 2000s kids who grew up watching the original anime in mind. I've watched some reviews who say that the main cast of characters in Digimon Survive are all based on stereotypes, which is a criticism I don't really understand since the main cast of characters from Digimon have always been this way. Personally, I think that a Gen Zer take on what's basically the Digimon adventure formula, where it's a group of kids from different cliques working together with their partners to stop an evil force and find a way to return back home safely, is the perfect way to make a new story with this IP. I also like the style of Digimon Survive way more than some of the other Digimon games. I know that the Cyber Sleuth games have their fans, and I'm sure I'll play through them both at some point, but I tried playing the first title and stopped after a few hours because I wasn't really a fan of the digital world, looking like a great value knockoff social media app on the outside, and looking like you're going to have to fight Rinsler when you travel into a dungeon. I know that sounds really dumb to say, because the whole idea of Digimon is the existence of the digital world and being able to coexist with software, but I like it better when the digital world is represented as a landscape, or something that you'd want to explore yourself instead of a bunch of vague sci-fi crap. It would be like in Star Wars if every single scene took place on spaceships floating around a bunch of supernovas instead of seeing what life is like in Naboo. Or if every area in the classic Final Fantasy games was just a bunch of caves, castles, and small towns, with no identity to make them stand out. The point is, I'd rather see people come up with actual world building for the digital world in Digimon games instead of just lazily barfing out something that looks like it's too on the nose. And in this regard, I think Digimon Survive does this way better than the Cyber Sleuth games. Another thing I appreciate is that the tone of the story is more perilous, and the main characters are older, generally being high schoolers instead of 10 or 12-year-olds, which makes the conflicts and aspects of the characters a lot more mature and believable. There's also the use of swearing, but it's very mild, only using words like damn, hell, and bastard, which I hear are pretty commonly used over in Japan anyway, so whatever. Now that I'm done going over the things I liked about this game, now I'm going to explain why it's bad on the whole and why I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. While I did think that the story had a good first act, and the characters had a good introduction, once they get to the alternate dimension, specific characters become butchered. And yes, you heard that correctly. The continuity of Digimon Survive only partially involves the digital world, if at all. And the way that the whole lore works is that thousands of years ago, there were these creatures called Kemonogamis, or beast gods, who lived in an alternate dimension, and they didn't become visible to humans until they were able to manifest themselves through humans, who performed rituals. And more recently, they were able to do the same thing with computers and digital technology in the dimension and timeline your main characters are from. So in case you were as confused as I was when I first played through this game, I'll give you a summary of the beginning of the plot. Basically, the main characters accidentally get transported to the dimension where the Kemonogamis are, after chasing Koromon, who is able to lead them there somehow. They don't get transported to the digital world and fight alongside the digital representations of the Kemonogamis. They get transported to another dimension and fight alongside supernatural creatures that are used as a basis for the Digimon that manifest themselves through computers in the dimension that the main characters are from, obviously. You might think that this is really contrived writing, but don't worry, it gets worse. First off, there's 2 different characters who call themselves the same person, Haru. One of them, no not that one, along with his older sister Miyuki, have been trapped inside the Kemonogami world for 50 years. But because time flows a lot faster in the Kemonogami world, they were actually stuck there for hundreds of years, yet still look the same age due to some weird time compression, I guess. The way that the main characters are portrayed in this game is mostly okay, with the exceptions being Ryo, Shuji, and I'll talk about Renamon later, since I have a lot to say about that. Ryo is a borderline schizophrenic weirdo with an Oedipus complex who contributes very little to the overall plot. But the real kicker is, if you want to get the good ending, you have to subject yourself to playing this game more than once via a New Game Plus mode, and raise your affinity with him enough to save his life. But if it's your first time playing, then he'll become infatuated by a giant spider MILF, go all feral on everyone, and get sucked into a dark void where he ends up in South America, signs a contract with Disney, and becomes the long-lost indigenous weekend son of Tim Allen. Shuji's another potential Razzie Award nominee, who constantly berates his partner Lopmon like a redheaded stepchild anytime he makes a suggestion. Another fun fact about Shuji is that he's one of the few characters who needs to not die if you want to get the true ending. And I thought all along that you needed to raise your affinity with Shuji in order to rescue him just like I did for Ryo, but nope. As long as you rescue Ryo, the game locks you into getting the best possible ending, meaning that the game ended up gaslighting me into siding with an abusive asshole when I could have just given him shit this whole time like in my last playthrough. So after you rescue Miyu, you encounter Garurumon and Monzemon trying to kidnap her to use as a sacrifice, because it's the only way to keep their world safe, but it's more elaborate than that. You see, they confused Miyu, Kaito's younger sister, with Miyuki, who's supposed to be a sorceress that needs to be sacrificed, even though they say children get sacrificed all the time, so I don't understand why she's so special. Well anyway, there's a place somewhere in the carnival where they can go down into the sewer and get roofied by the spider milk they just fought a couple chapters ago, only to wake up and see Shuji beating the fuck out of his partner Lopmon because of a panic attack he's having over his dad. Ryo says in a previous cutscene that this whole situation reminds him about the obsession he had over his mom, which is something he probably should have kept to himself, but you get to watch him and Shuji tard fight each other, which is pretty entertaining. It's revealed through a flashback that Garurumon used to be the partner of Haru. No, not that one, but they got separated due to Haru going back to his dimension. Garurumon was left thinking his bond with Haru was in vain, and only associates himself with the children's sacrifices, so that the other Kemonogamis who partner up with them can't evolve out of spite for what happened to him. Haru and Haru explore an apartment that looks like the place they both grew up in. Both Takuma and Agumon take a family picture from there around the same time, and they take it to Haru, who reveals that Haru looks exactly like how Haru did when Haru was young, but Haru didn't feel like bringing it up until now because of his amnesia. Regardless, Miyuki ends up getting captured by Piedmon, the main characters rescue her, and somehow her, Agumon, Takuma, and Piedmon end up in the human dimension. After Takuma and Miyuki wake up, they're all like, it's currently spring break in the year 2020. But then they both realize, oh shit, it's currently spring break in the year 2020. We need to go back to the shrine, travel to the other dimension, and rescue our friends before the government forces us to stay inside for another week. So they defeat Piedmon, go back to the Kemonogami dimension, regroup with the main characters. Miyuki ends up being possessed, and it's revealed that Haru, no, not that one, was actually Renamon in disguise this whole time. Now I'm going to address the elephant in the room and debunk this myth about Renamon. Despite what Gen Zers and double-digit IQ Coomers on Reddit will tell you, Renamon isn't trans or a non-binary queen or anything like that at all. And I know what some of y'all are thinking. In Season 3 of the anime, she didn't feel comfortable sitting with the girls because Digimon don't have genders, so wouldn't that make Renamon non-binary? Well, as a Digitard who's been a fan of the franchise since it aired on Jetix in the 2000s, you're going to need to prepare for a huge nerdy lore dump. Because anyone who says that a Digimon can be trans or is able to fall under the quote-unquote gender spectrum only have surface-level knowledge of how the lore works and shouldn't be giving their opinions on things when they don't even know what they're talking about. Twitter fangirls merely adopted Digimon. I was born in it, molded by it. First off, what Renamon said in that episode of Digimon Tamers was a mistranslation from the Japanese script when it got localized in North America. You want proof? The head writer for Digimon Tamers, Chikai J. Konaka, had a blog where he talked about controversial things like being against the deplatforming of YouTubers for making a few mistakes in a video every once in a while, and doing your own independent research on COVID-19, instead of using Twitter and watching CNN to get your information. And back in 2021, he put on a stage drama at a convention where the cast of Digimon Tamers was confronted by physical manifestations of political correctness. So it's safe to say he's not the type of dude who would incorporate themes about gender identity into a show like how some of y'all are thinking. What Renamon actually said was Digimon don't have biology like humans do since they're all digital. That doesn't mean the whole concept of genders doesn't exist in the digital world. It just means that there are different rules for how gender works with Digimon compared to humans. So, with that in mind, there is an overall consistency with that throughout the franchise that hasn't changed because it would be stupid to do so. Sure, sometimes in fiction, writers and concept artists will create a character that's supposed to be androgynous in order to make the character relatable to both boys and girls. And I think that's what Kanaka had in mind when he was first coming up with ideas for Renamon's character. But she definitely doesn't come off as anything other than a tough woman in the show. And there's a big difference between making a character androgynous and making a character non-binary. I can't really blame anyone nowadays for making mistakes like this, because back in the 2000s when Digimon Tamers was relevant, people had this thing in their heads called common sense, where your gender was how you described the organs you had, and it was like this objective thing that you couldn't really argue against. So like for example, penises were something that only guys could have, and the supermassive black holes that turn credit card statements into the length of a Kingdom Hearts story summary on Wikipedia were things that only women could have. But in the year 2024, Western women have arm stubs grafted on their crotches, and Western men have a hole that bleeds out beefaroni batter. So the topic of gender is a divisive issue now, because we're supposed to play pretend with people who socially identify as a sex, who have the body parts that they're never gonna have, or else we could lose our jobs and become destitute. The existence of gender for Digimon is further proven by the fact that there are sometimes a male and female variation of what is essentially the same Digimon. Plus, Digimon talk, behave, and have the same mannerisms as the sex that they physically represent. Another consistent aspect of the overall lore that hasn't changed is that Digimon are all digital programs. And if you know how programming works, you know that programs are all made up of ones and zeros, which would make everything in the digital world, not just Digimon, binary. And that's their biology. A Digimon literally cannot be non-binary, because programs at the core require set parameters and functions that execute tasks. Not sometimes one thing and sometimes another depending on how the program feels that day. It has to function based on a set of instructions that somebody else wrote. So if the biology of every Digimon is digital, and their gender is based on a set of instructions, then in Season 3 of the original Digimon show, trans acceptance in the digital world would cause a bunch of death and destruction in the form of bugs that Tai's dad and his colleagues would have to iron out. It's not that Renamon didn't feel comfortable sitting at the girls' table, because she didn't think she was female, and it wasn't because she was non-binary, it was because biology in the digital world is different and she just didn't know what to do. To put this in another way that the Zoomers watching this review might understand a little bit better, it would be like if TikTok shot out of your phone and became a creature with slender shoulders and wide birthing hips. You wouldn't really call it a man by instinct, and the TikTok creature in question wouldn't necessarily be offended if you categorized it in that way either. They would just be confused about it in the same way they would about, race or ethnicity and why that would matter to us humans, know what I'm saying? In the continuity for Digimon Tamers, the whole existence of Digimon was created by a Chinese foreigner and his Japanese colleagues in the form of a computer program that would bug out and go apeshit. And in the continuity of Digimon in general, they typically spill into the real world, causing a bunch of shit and drama, but they were still treated like digital creatures at the end of the day. I don't know if it's due to some convoluted Japanese writing that got lost in translation, or if this is yet another example of vocalization that's been so popular over the last 5 years, but in Digimon Survive, Renamon is referred to as a guy throughout the entirety of this game. Yeah, the curvy yellow fox with birthing hips and the purple yin-yang thigh tattoos was pretending to be a prepubescent boy for hundreds of years due to some past trauma. Not only that, but she's partly responsible for harming children under the leadership of 4 pagan gods, who resemble a turtle, a tiger, a phoenix, and a rare deep-water Jew. These 4 creatures sealed away the true antagonist who calls himself the Master, and he's been causing all these fun little dark voids to appear that have been killing everything this whole time. If we're to believe that the lore behind how the Kemonogamis are used for the digital world is consistent, and that Digimon are meant to mirror the Kemonogamis in a separate dimension, Renamon's digital representation in the dimension the main characters are from would bug out and become non-existent over there too. And yes, I'm referring to Renamon with female pronouns, because only a woman would inadvertently destroy her own society over a grudge she held for hundreds of years. Unfortunately, this is what happens when you overcomplicate the lore in a franchise like this. In every other continuity of Digimon I remember, Renamon was just always simply a female character and nobody had an issue with it. But in Digimon Survive, the true bad guy wanted to do horrible things that only benefits him behind the scenes, distracting Kemonogamis with identity politics, and brainwashing them into thinking pagan rituals that sacrifice human children would save their world, when in actuality it would just make the bad guy stronger and harder to overthrow. Renamon identifying as someone she's not makes no sense, because it would cause a discrepancy between how she is as a Kemonogami and how she is as a piece of software on a computer in the dimension the main characters are from, causing a compiler error that turns her digital manifestation into an unusable bundle of bits. A fragment, if you will. Either that, or the global elites found a way to program fluoride into the digital world's water supply too. The real Haru, aka the Professor, abandoned his sister, and left her alone in the Kemonogami world when they were kids. So after it's revealed that Renamon was pretending to be the kid version of Haru all this time, she got so pissed off that she punched the real Haru to the ground, and god damn it, I wish that were me. But eventually they all patched things up. Both Renamon and Garurumon forgive the real Haru for what he did, since it wasn't on purpose. The main cast of characters wipe out the four beasts. Miyuki snaps out of being possessed. They all confront the Master and kill him off like a watered-down ripoff of Shin Megami Tensei Devil Survivor, letting all the main characters travel back to their dimension and live happily ever after. There's a scene at the very end where another group of kids come across Demi Vmon from Season 2 of the original anime, but it doesn't matter. Digimon Survive sold so poorly that it's probably never going to get a sequel. And if for some reason after watching this review you actually plan on buying this trash, I would only recommend it at an extremely steep discount, and if you're a die-hard old-school fan of the franchise like me, who wants to experience an alternate take on the Digimon formula that comes off as more convoluted than interesting. So I'll see you guys in the next review. Peace out.